So I'd like to, in this session, share some ideas about what the Jesus myth is actually about. But to do that, I need to first talk about some Gnostic philosophy, because you can't understand what it's about if you don't understand what it's pointing to. So I want to lay some foundations. We'll cover as much as we can. We're going to have 40 minutes now, and then we'll come back and finish off with that. And then as we go through in the afternoon, I'd like to really look at what this experience of Gnosis is. What is it, actually, that they're talking about? So that we can see that the thing which was relevant then is still relevant now. That this isn't just about history, it's not just a quirk about our civilization, it's not just a, that's interesting, it's actually very pertinent to actually what this mystery of life is. This is a current which has always been there of people who are exploring this mystery of life in a deep way. So the essence of Gnosis is self-knowledge. Clement of Alexandria says, knowing yourself is the greatest of all things, because when you know yourself, you know God, which is a pretty full-on thing to say. You are God. Wow, what does that mean? Let's look at the idea of identity, which is not just Gnostic, it's throughout the ancient world. And it's come down to us, and we still have it to today. But I feel like we have it in a kind of garbled form. The essence of identity is seen as body and soul. And then behind that, spirit and God. I don't know about you, but certainly when I started studying spirituality and exploring all of these philosophies and then writing about it even, that's when it really came in, when I started writing. I started using the words like soul and spirit and thinking, what the hell do these words mean? Actually, everyone seems to mean something else by them. Are they the same thing? Is it a kind of spooky thing that lives inside your body and pops out your head when you die? What is it? The conclusion I've come to is obviously you can use language in any way you want, and the way that I'm about to use language may not be the way you do, and I don't want to impose my way on you. But I do want to point to the way it was being used, I feel, in the ancient world, when these words and these concepts were being first developed. And I think what was being described by these terms, body, soul, and spirit, are all really obvious. They're descriptive terms of things you can see now. They're not, the soul is not something you could go, do you believe in one? It's like there's no doubt about the soul or the spirit. There's no doubt about it at all because you're experiencing both now. So what I want to do is look at this moment and just point to the obviousness of what's being described. So the first is body, which is, one of the words they use is physis, from which we get physical. It's this stuff. This, you can touch it and wave at it and listen to it, and it's all nice and obvious. It's bodies. I like bodies. Everyone should have one. Here it is. That's the first level. The second level is soul. Well, the word that was being used by the Gnostics and throughout the ancient world was the word psyche, or psyche. And psyche is what we now today call psyche. You're experiencing it right now. That's soul. There's no missing it. Right now, you're experiencing two dimensions of experience. Very distinct. Very, very distinct. One dimension is sensation. There's a flow of sensation. That's the physical world, physis, in which you exist as a body. And you're also experiencing a completely different flow of experience, which you might call a mind or imagination. It's full of memories, it's full of images, it's full of thoughts. It's a whole world there, actually. And if you go exploring in there, you will find it goes on and on and on, just like this one does, in every direction. But you're experiencing it right now. In fact, actually, in this room, all of the action is taking place in soul. Very little is happening in body. You are all very polite and sitting there, and just making sure your body's comfortable. I'm doing this funny thing where I throw my arms around and move about because that's what a Tim Freak does. But all of the action is taking place in soul. I'm taking things from soul and passing them, going blah, 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 and they're reaching you and blah, and we're connecting soul to soul. That's what's happening. It'd be very hard, I think, to disagree with that's what's happening. You're a body, you're a soul. It's right here, right now. We're connecting soul to soul as I say these words. These words in physics are vibrations in air. These words in soul have meaning. Come alive. It's the world of ideas. It's the world that matters to us. And then there's spirit. The word in the Greek that's usually used is pneuma. Also, the pagans and the Gnostics will often use the word nous as well. Plotinus calls nous a knowing principle. Spirit really means essence. Essence is an interesting word because it comes from esse, to be, the Latin. It's your being. It's your being. Your spirit, your pneuma, is your being. Or to put it another way, in this moment, have a look. There is a flow of sensation happening. Colours and sounds, yeah? That's happening. And there's a flow of psyche happening. Thoughts and imaginings and memories. And what is experiencing all of that? What is it that's experiencing body and soul? That's spirit. So a word we might use today may be something like awareness. Something is conscious of this. It's the knower. The knower of this. Now there's a lovely line. Paul says something very similar to it. You can find almost the same thing word for word in the Upanishads in India, and indeed in the Taoist tradition in China. But the quote I'm going to give you, because it's Gnostic, is from the Gospel of Thomas. And this Gospel says, this is about this figure of Jesus conveying the Gnosis to his students. And he says, I will reveal to you something that cannot be seen, that cannot be heard, that cannot be touched, and which cannot be imagined. What's that? What's he talking about? Awareness. He is pointing to spirit. That's the whole point. He's pointing to spirit. Why? Because your spirit is that which is looking. But it doesn't have any colour, does it? Have a look. It has no shape. You can't see it. Something is looking, but you can't see it. Something is listening, but it makes no noise. Something experiencing the body, but it's not a sensation. Something is experiencing thought, but it's not a thought, it's the thinker. It's before your experience. It transcends your experience. It is formless. There's a flow of form happening in this moment, and it's being experienced by something which is not a form. It is formless. Here, form. Here, formless. The Gnosis, actually in the East just as much as in the West, has always been pointing to that. pointing out of experience to what transcends experience, what is deeper than experience. It's a very challenging thing, which only makes sense when you pay very close attention to your being, which is why most spirituality is about taking your experience and looking at the experiencer. In the ancient world, this was called theoria. We'll do some of it in the afternoon. It's called theoria. We get the word theory from it, but it was nothing to do with that. It was the opposite. It was actually the process of coming back onto yourself. So, we'll talk more about all of that, for sure, because that's really the thing which I'm interested in sharing with you, really. It's like, what's that? What's that? One of the images that the Gnostics use a fair bit, as do nearly all mystical traditions, to explain that, which is the centre of a lot of my later work, lucid living and onwards, is to use the metaphor of a dream. Paul does it, and many of the Gnostic texts are dream-based. In my book, at the beginning of The Laughing Jesus, there's a whole collection of these texts. Because that's a place where you can get what this might mean to you. You can start to get it as a intellectually, and then you can move into it experientially. Because if you think about when you dream, you will see there's a paradox to your nature, just as there is now. When you dream, you appear to be a thing in the dream, but what you are on a deeper level is the dreamer. And the dreamer is awareness. The dreamer has no form. You can't find the dreamer inside the dream, because the dreamer is all of the dream. And you find yourself in the world and outside the world at the same time. That you're this formless presence and you're a thing in a dream. That's, I think, if you think and meditate on that, that becomes clearer and clearer. And then apply that to now. Because all of the mystical traditions are saying the same is true now. That you are both a thing in the world and you're the awareness within which everything is arising. Both. Like in a dream. So before we get into that more experientially, I feel it would be good to just talk about the Jesus myth in relation to that. We've got a little bit of time to do that. The process of initiation. For the Gnostics, it goes right back to the ancient pagan mysteries, the same, is fundamentally going through those levels of your identity. So you start off what they would call a hillock. They had various names for it, that's one of them. Which means you think you're your body. That's who you think you are. Who are you? I'm this. Awful lot of people are in that particular state. You think you're the thing. You then go through what they called the psychic initiation, and it doesn't mean anything to do with psychic phenomena. That's the way we use it now. It's to do with the discovery of soul. And at a certain point, you discover, wow, hang on a second. There's this whole other thing going on here. There's much more to me than meets the eye, literally. And you enter a process which in today's language you'd probably call personal growth, or working on yourself, or purification was the term that was used in the ancient world. So you start off, and the great Gnostic injunction, which goes right back to Eleusis, and the oracle at Delphi, which had famously Gnothiciton written across it, know yourself. Know yourself. That was the great thing. So you start off, know yourself. I'm this. Oh, actually, I'm this. There's this whole other level to know. And what sort of person am I? Am I a good person? Can I turn myself into a better person? And all that, what is it to be a spiritual person? How can I live in relationship to God, or all that stuff? You're a soul. At a certain point, the spiritual pneumatic initiation these, I think, are actually natural states which people go through anyway, but in the mysteries they're formalized into events, initiatory events. That's the discovery of spirit. If you've had that, it's a hell of a shock. Because you're going along thinking, yeah, I'm Tim, and I'm getting to be a better Tim, and I'm purifying Tim, and, you know, I'm going to be a spiritual Tim. And then suddenly, bang, you go, who am I? I'm not Tim. I'm not Tim. I'm not a person at all. There is a person, and I am that, but also I am not that. I am this formless presence. I am something beyond the personal. There's a vastly deeper level to who I am. And that's the pneumatic initiation. When that happens, you start discovering something quite extraordinary. Because as you go into your essence, as you go into your being, there is no separateness, because there's no form to it. So there's no walls, there's no divisions, there's no separateness. So that you start to realize that your being is one with all being. Hence Clement and so many of the Gnostics. Well, the great Gnostic heresy in every culture throughout every age in history has been, you are God. Because there's nothing else but God. It's all God. That this is God's journey of self-discovery that we're in. That's what it is. So we've got this paradox of here separate, here all one. That's and the journey has been from, oh, I'm this, to, oh, I'm this, to, oh my God, I'm everything. Now, how does that relate to the Jesus story? Well, it relates in a million ways. I've written a whole big book about it because it's full of these incredible little motifs. And I'd love to get into loads of them with you, but I'm going to just stick right now, before lunch, to an overarching picture, which is... Well, there's a lovely line in Plotinus. Plotinus is actually a pagan critic of the Gnostics. He's a rival. He's fed up because the people who come to his little seminars keep going off to the Gnostic seminars. It's like today. It's like me going, oh yeah, that so-and-so, whatever, he's nicking all my crowd. It's like, you know, it's the same. But he says some really interesting things. And what you see is that fundamentally they're all the same. They're different flavors of the same thing. He's more philosophical. The Gnostics are more mythological. But it's the same. And he says, yes, these Gnostics, they are teaching, as he is, Christianity is essentially about the ascent from the cave, which I'm sure you got told at Sunday school. Yeah, so everyone knows that Christianity is about the ascent from the cave. Of course you do. And you know what? It is. It's about the ascent from the cave. So, what's the cave? Well, Jesus is born in a cave. We have it for Christmas as a stable, but in the Greek, he's pointing to a cave, and in the Gnostic myths, that's very clear. And the cave is Plato's cave, or I think in the ancient world, it would have been seen as Pythagoras' cave. And by saying that, that would have been as familiar, you know, if I got up here to most people today and I started talking about lightsabers and the Force, I probably wouldn't have to stop and go, you know, like in Star Wars, because it'd be like, yes, that's obvious. And likewise, amongst people in the ancient world, if you said the cave, you wouldn't have had to go on brackets, you know, like in Plato, that would have been obvious. Because it was a common philosophy, and the cave is the universe. The universe is the cave. The dream of life is the cave. They saw the night sky like a canopy. It looks like a canopy, doesn't it? And their teaching, this goes right back to ancient Egypt, which sounds very weird, but is actually, like most things, not as weird as it sounds, was that you are really a star. You look like this, but really you're a star. What do they mean by that? Well, they didn't mean that you're a big ball of gaseous material exploding, in infinity. They meant you are a hole in the veil that separates this, the cave, from the light. You're a hole through which that light is shining. Here's a way of getting what that means. Right now, I am looking at Andrew, and I am seeing the veil. Very nice veil, but nevertheless, a veil. Sensations, things I can see. But what I'm connecting with, particularly through the eyes, which are literally a hole, is the light of awareness looking back at me. Now I'm doing it with Jenny. So we are literally holes in the fabric of reality, through which we're connecting with something we can't see, which is looking back. So I'm something you can't see, conscious being, awareness, and I'm connecting through with something you can't see, which is looking back at me. So that through this, the light on the other side of the veil is connecting with itself. So we are holes in the veil. And we're looking through that hole all the time. We're connecting through that veil all the time. So, in the myth, Jesus is a big star. He's a big magic star. Of course he is. He's the Son of God, as is everyone. You're all sparks of God. We'll go into what the Son and the Father means later, when we bring in the daughter and the mother. Because you can't understand the Son and the Father without the daughter and the mother. Which is why Catholicism screwed up so badly, because they cut those two out and left us with one. So the whole thing, just men, right? Okay. We'll come back to the women. Right now, he's a star. Big star, right? Everyone sees the star, comes to him. And he's born in a cave. And in the Gnostic version, one of the Gnostic version, there's this explosion of light in the cave. And bang! And there's Jesus. The perfect one who's born. He's born of a virgin. Why? Because the virgin mother, we'll bring her in a bit when we do the goddess, but one of the versions is the virgin goddess sits at the cave, bringing souls in and out of incarnation. She is her of the left-hand path. You may remember Jesus is going to sit on the right hand, because the right hand is out, and the left hand is back in. So she's sitting there bringing souls back in. Come on, all the sparks you talked about. Come on, come on, get back in there. You got more to do. Come on, you sparks, come on. And she's pushing everyone back in. She's justice. She's karma, we would say if we use the Eastern. She's the fates. She's a virgin goddess. She's nature. What happens to the soul? It enters nature. This, Mother Nature. The forms. She comes down in. That's her job. And in comes Jesus. He then starts this journey, which will lead to the key point, which is actually the place that some of the Gospels begin, is his baptism. Baptism is the psychic initiation. Purification. It's the washing. It goes right back to the mysteries again. The ancient pagan mysteries are the same. It's the washing. So you wash away. And he's baptized, actually, and when he's baptized, the dove of Sophia, of wisdom, the goddess, arrives and comes down into him. And at that moment, he starts this journey in which he becomes the teacher of the soul wisdom. And he gathered around him, like Mithras and all the others, he gathered around him 12 disciples, which are the 12 constellations of the zodiac. And he's at the center. What fascinated the ancients, of course, the night sky fascinated them. There was no internet. And what fascinated them was there was a point which didn't move, around which the whole thing turned. And Jesus is the point that doesn't move, at the center. And there's a wonderful one of the Gospels where he's actually at the center, and people and his 12 disciples dance around him in a round dance. And he leads this refrain. He says something, and they say it back, and he says something, and they say it back, and they do this whole dance with him at the center. He's the still point of the turning world. He's going to become the still point of you. So he is going to represent, and he does represent, spirit. He represents the deepest essence. He is the Christ. He's on the journey to becoming the Christ anyway. So what that's saying is, look, in you there is a center which does not move. And then there's this wheel. The Pythagoreans called it the wheel of grief. In the East, it's the wheel of karma. I like to think of it as the Ferris wheel of happiness and sadness, because that's how I experience it. It's like all of those constellations, all of different states we enter, and you can feel yourself, can't you, in your life? Is it just me? It's like, da-da-da-da, hey, it's getting really good. Hey, I've got the hang of this. Hey, I'm doing all this shit. Oh, fuck. Oh, no. Oh, God, I hate this. Oh, hang on. Oh, I'm kind of getting it now. Oh, I understand. Oh, now no. And you just whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The teaching which often gets put out here is the secret is to get off the wheel. I don't think it is. I think the secret is you were never on the wheel. That there's a center which doesn't move, and then there's the wheel. And the Christ is the center which doesn't move. So he finds Jesus surrounded by his 12 disciples. And then he is going to be anointed. He does all these miracles, all of which have significance and are interesting, and I haven't got time to go into right now. He gets anointed as the Christ by Mary Magdalene. We'll come back to Mary this afternoon. I haven't got time to do her justice. She's such an important figure in this myth. We can't do her justice in 10 minutes. But he's anointed by her. She represents the soul. Let me say that much. She represents the psyche. And I'll go into why there's this male-female dichotomy by explaining the larger mythos within which all of this exists, which is a myth of actually creation. She represents the soul, and he takes the soul through 7 levels of purification, frees her of 7 demons. That's what we would think of today as the chakras. We all take it from India today, but these are all Western concepts. And it comes from the 7 heavenly bodies. It was also seen as different levels. A lot of Gnosticism is about working your way through these levels. This is all psychological work to free yourself from places. And that leads him to be the Christ. So here we can just say this. What is the Christ? What is that? What does Paul mean by the Christ within you? What is that about? The Christ is not some guy who wore a crown of thorns. The Christ is your own deepest being. The Christ in you is exactly the same as what the Hindus mean by the Atman, the Buddhists mean by the Buddha nature. It's actually what each one of us calls I. And it's kind of fun because we write it like a 1. Because on its deepest level, there's one of us. The Christ is the awareness in everything. It's the being of everything. So when we discover the Christ within, we discover our own deeper nature.
That's the I am, isn't it?
The I am, yes, the I am, which is everything. They imagined it. Like, if you can think of a circle. This is Pythagorean, but they were all influenced by it. A circle with a center and a radius. The circle they imagined as body. On the outside, then all of the radius, that's all soul. Levels and levels and levels of soul. And then right at the center is a point which in geometry has no dimensions, which is spirit, the pneuma. And then imagine it that every single, with thousands and whatever, millions, infinite number of radii. And on the outside in the circle, that's all the different bodies. That's us in this room now. All these different bodies on the outside. And we go back in ourselves and we're all different souls. And then if we reach deeper and deeper, it becomes more and more collective. And then we reach the center. And your center and my center is the same center. Look outwards, on the surface, we're all different. Look inwards, the center is all the same. That center is the Christ within. So, how's Jesus going to get there? Well, he's just been purified, he's a teacher, he's doing very well, he comes into Jerusalem, he is now the king. Say the Messiah is the king. Often you'll find in the pagan literature that's called the king, it's exactly the same. It's the sense of you're in command of yourself. And he comes in riding a donkey. Because the donkey is Set in the Egyptian mythology. The donkey is the lower part of you. The donkey is the thing you have to master. It's just like the same in the Zen tradition, when you master the bull, or indeed the Mithraic tradition in the West, same thing. You master yourself. He's mastered himself, and he's been coming in, and everyone's going, yay, the king! And he's coming on in on his donkey, triumphant, about to experience a complete transformation, in which he will go from that to being put to death, abandoned by everyone, and having the very worst of things happen to him. What a story. I mean, wow. Very ancient story. You can see why it's lasted. And this is about the pneumatic initiation. It's about the complete switch around. And it's about the transformation which would, in traditional language, be thought of as the death of the self, and its rebirth as the Christ. What that really means, we'll talk about more this afternoon. He's put to death. Really interesting, though. When we have Jesus on the cross, in one of the Gnostic versions, we have this figure, really striking, kind of difficult but amazing figure, the laughing Jesus. Where Jesus is on the cross being tortured. I mean, if you want a symbol for what's the worst thing you can imagine, well, Jesus represents the highest initiate. And in the highest initiate, the worst thing is happening, and he is loving his enemies. He is forgiving his enemies. He is still in touch with that. It's a very stoic idea. You can endure the worst of things and still stay true to this awakened Gnosis. And in the Gnostic version, it's represented by the fact that Jesus, his deeper Jesus, is a being of light in a cave, of course. And he's laughing. And says words, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, I seem to suffer, but I do not suffer, because I discriminate what I appear to be from what I am. That's a very Stoic statement from the Stoic philosophy, pagan philosophy. So it's representing here somebody who is having the very worst of things happen in what is a very brutal world that they're living in, and is able to be there still going, okay, and I still love. It's an incredibly profound thing. And then, of course, he dies. And then Mary, who is, I'll return to again when we talk about the Virgin Mary and the Goddess. But it's Mary, this figure representing the soul, comes. She's a woman. She is the great apostle. Mary is the Sophia. She is the one who teaches all the ignorant guys who are actually all stuck on the zodiac. She is the one who brings the deep wisdom, the secret teachings to the men. Yes, sorry, Magdalene. She comes in the myth. She comes to the tomb, the cave. But the cave's empty. The cave is empty. And Paul says Jesus conquered the cosmos. The cave is the forms. He came into the forms. He awoke through the forms. And then he transcended the forms. And if you remember when he dies, the veil in the temple is ripped in two. The veil in the temple was a tapestry of the stars. The veil of appearances is ripped open, and he goes out. He is now in the treasure house of light. He has conquered the cosmos. This is why Plotinus says Christianity is again about the ascent from the cave. It's how we come into life and how we transcend life. And it's a story, a dramatization of the process of initiation, which is happening actually anyway to all of us, because spirituality is not something distinct from life. Spiritual initiation is a intellectualized picture of the natural process which we are in. And just as with every other natural process, by understanding it, we can work with it. By understanding the process that we're in, we can work with it to enable us to come in, wake up to soul, wake up to spirit, discover that oneness, and find that we're outside the whole thing. Now, there's actually a further part to this story. a further part to this story because if you remember what happens after that is Jesus wakes up, or Jesus comes back to life. The word resurrection in the Greek, anastasis, it means wake up. Same thing. It's about awakening. He comes back to life in the body. And this is, I think, crucial to the Christian philosophy. He doesn't just transcend. He comes back into, as a transcendent being, into the body. So it's like, I'm here with you. That's where the gospel story takes us. There is more. Because where it's going is to something which was, again, important in the pagan world, and it's absolutely essential to understanding what Christianity is really about, which is the mystical marriage, the sacred marriage between the male principle represented by Jesus and a female principle. The mystical marriage is where it ends up, which is to do with the bringing together of all opposites. This has all been about getting us to that place. The mystical marriage has been completely lost from mainstream Christianity.